And in the event of a crisis, welcome. This is Basis 152. What we've been doing over the 30 odd, 40 odd years, we're dealing with things in the space program, withheld secrets. I've also been talking to people who know the late John Searle, who were dealing with electrographitics in England as late as the early 1980s. And that was actually going to be used for an airline by Freddie Laker. So we had advanced electrogravitics in the 1980s, and they were all given a little bit of a phone call, all told to shut up, there's a bullet with your name on it. So that is establishing the context of electrogravitic technology to get big things into space, okay? So there was a guy called Tomlinson. John Tomlinson?
Tompkins? William
yeah.
Tompkins?
Yes, William Tompkins. I keep getting that mixed up. He was bumped off because he got a little bit too cocky about, in the 1940s, they were building submarine pressure hulls. Now, if you want to have submarines, it's a very good idea to have a heavy steel pressure hull. That's the thing that takes the pressure of the deep ocean. However, while they were doing that, they were making submarine pressure hulls for something else. So that was for some kind of secret space program. So the pictures we're going to be talking about, golly gosh, look like submarines. So the whole point of it is then a gentleman called John Walson decided to modify a telescope. And I'm going to paraphrase this tremendously. You can go into a lot more detail. You can have a macro lens on a camera, which means you can go up to a flower and take a picture of a flower at close focus. So what essentially I think has happened with John Walson is that he decided to take something up in space at relatively close focus. Not the distant star, but something else a lot closer in between, and that is where these books come in, right? Okay. So that establishes our groundbreaking use of these books. This is the color version. Just to confuse things, this is the black and white version, which has got a full color page on the cover. And this is the full color version, which is mostly black and white. That's the way I remember it. Now, these are very important things being said, and we're just going to flash this up. We're talking about these pictures, okay? There's a book on how to do this. This is the book. This is the cheaper book, and that's what we're going to talk about. John F. Wilkie, you've got something to do with this. So who are you? And how did these things happen? Over to you.
I am really glad to finally meet you, Mr. Miles. Thank you for having me on. And Mr. Walson asked me to represent him for the specific time frame. He's going through a lot.
Yes.
Imagine you know that.
I think people have to understand there's a lot of people going through a hell of a lot on this business. Okay.
And he's personally really being, I think, harassed, but that's another story. I am originally from Detroit. I'm a child of the 70s and was supposed to be a third-generation automotive engineer, but instead I went into the Air Force in the late 70s and ended up working on fighter jet engines out of Eglin, Florida. And I only really bring this up. This gives me my basis, my beginning of my technical knowledge of aircraft and airframes, power plants. An interesting side note is during my tenure, before anyone had ever heard about this, even George Knapp out of Las Vegas, I was recruited and sent on what they call a TDY, a temporary duty assignment, where we went to Nellis Air Force outside of Las Vegas.
That's a small Air Force base near Las Vegas. Nothing going on here. just move along and enjoy yourself.
They were doing joint military exercises where they have faux, encounters, faux combats against the blue and the red, that kind of stuff. So one of the days while I was out there, my supervisor said, "Hey, we want you to take a ride to another base that we have around in the area and just look at an engine already outside of the airframe." They didn't tell me anything else. It was highly unusual, but so myself and one of my cohorts got on a van with the driver, and it took us way outside of town. And remember, this is before the world had been told about this place, but we went to outside. But I mean, there's a little black mailbox on the side of the road, and then you go a little farther and you end up coming to a back gate that when we entered, we were boarded by several security police with machine guns and checked our backgrounds. And I didn't understand any of that. My clearance and my access was top secret with a need to know. So anyways, nowadays, everybody knows that gate, from television and stuff. It's what they now call the S4 or Groom Lake Dreamland Area 51.
Yeah.
So once you go through that back gate, it's about another 45-minute drive to get down to the main section. And
That's
honestly,
the dry lake bed area.
what I saw was like an old airstrip, and then they had what they call the tarmac lines that will go to old TADVs, old hangars. All right. And I didn't really see anything unusual, but as we're driving by, they did have some of the doors open, and I got to see a drone before drones were known. I didn't mean to rhyme. Sorry about that. And it is no reference to Tom Cruise, but they had a drone that literally had wings attached to it, and when it took off, it would deploy to get rid of its wings. It'd just drop them. Okay, so it just looked like a pretty common saucer, and the name of it back then was the Dark Star. And this is 40 years before the Tom Cruise movie where they named the SR-72 the Dark Star or whatever. Right? So nothing of note really to say. I just checked out an engine's oil tank. It didn't make any sense to me. After that, I
Sorry,
went back
what
to
date
Florida.
is this?
What's that?
What date is this?
I want to put this sometime, probably September 1981.
Okay, that's a long time before we ever heard about this.
Yes. And then I think several years later, I was living in Hollywood. Long story. You need a whole nother series. Well, they had an engine pulled out of a plane on a stand. It's basically a trailer. And we had a very simple oil tank with a visual reader. And all I told them was, you need to add oil. That doesn't make any sense to me for the time and the resources they spent to send me down there. I went back to my base and I go on with my life. Now, probably
I'm
5
going
or
to
6
interrupt
years
you there. I'm going to say that looks as if they generated a genuine front memory and you did something else.
That it's very keen of you, sir.
Can you remember that?
I think it was about 5 or 6 years later. I'm watching television in Los Angeles, and a fellow named George Knapp came on, and he announced that there was this base out in the middle of nowhere, and a lot of crazy things were going on. I took notice, and that night when I went to bed, I began a series of dreams that went on for months, almost like something triggered my memory. And it was so realistic, I felt like possibly it wasn't a dream. And there was some things that happened, and I just was taken to have like a medical exam, nothing too crazy or thorough, just scans and look in your ear. And I always refer to it as a dream because I can't substantiate this, but I
Well, what
remember I had
happened?
an Asian,
Tell us all.
well, I had an Asian doctor in a white coat doing simple, ear and eye, nose, throat, right? And there was a large window where there's people, some of them were brass. And oddly enough, at the time, I know this sounds kind of silly almost, but I remember thinking to myself, the other people in the room looked like they were dressed up for a costume party. Just very odd, like genie outfits, and somebody else looked like they were a superhero or something. It didn't make any sense. But remember, I believed for a long time it was a dream. And that was basically the beginning of my, entrance into having an interest and following up my study of technologies, airframes, and power plants, right? For decades now, that's been one of my main hobbies and one of my main interests. So that's how I wanted to preface this before I talk about that. Probably 15 years ago, uh, I'm going off into the weeds here. In the 1990s, Mr. Miles, in America, for a couple years, I was a known UFO researcher. And I did the TV shows and the conventions because I wrote a book called Solar Obliteration. And a year or two
What
after
about
that, there
that
were
book,
several.
Solar
What's that?
Obliteration? What is in the book? Can we still get it?
Well, in the mid 90s, I had seen a lot of things over Los Angeles. I had seen them so regularly that I thought, what if I pursued a method to hasten the process? Because it was on a regular basis, I would take friends with me and they would see their first UFO. So how could I but you'd have to wait around a couple hours. How could I hasten this process? And that's an hour show by itself. But what I learned was before the advent of consumer grade accessible, infrared and UV camera technology was available commercially, that I had somehow realized that there was things that intentionally or unintentionally were using the light to shield themselves, the direct light, or basically to camouflage themselves with it. And my point is, if you were to take a pair of Polaroid sunglasses and put them on, the sky goes from being bright and yellow or whatever to very azure blue, right? And the reason is because the direct light that's coming into your eyes is deflected. Now you're seeing on an angle, you're not seeing direct. So now you could see things that you could not see normally if you could block out the direct light. And I used an overhang of a building and looked right next to the sun. I looked into it, what I refer to as its corona.
Yeah,
And that was the
which is
beginning
what
of it. And
happens
I
when you have
think,
an eclipse.
yes, and all of a sudden they're seeing things. And I think it was a guy named William Hamilton Jr. had written an article, and I read that, and I took what he said just a little farther. Ended up for 2 or 3 years putting my video camera out and getting very clear pictures of saucers and all kinds of exotic things that we also only had VHS technology. We did not have HD. We did not have, high definition. So there's still a little blurry. There was still a lot of conjecture and having to analyze. During that period of time, I learned that if I took one of these fuzzy JPG picture files and I just put a line tool on it, that I could start getting some clarity out of these otherwise fuzzy pictures.
What do you mean putting a line through it?
Well, I mean, if you have a cloudy, unfocused line on the side of a ship or something, if I just cut it with a straight line and remove the fuzzy part, now you start to get some real structure. You could clear up these pictures.
In
I
other
want to
words,
say
the JPEG encoding. It's a
I
way
could
that
do a, yes,
the
sir.
JPEG averages out motion, and that's how.
Yes, and it does compress it a lot,
Yeah.
but
I,
I found that I do what they call the artist renditions. So at least 90%, in my opinion, accuracy. I believe it's more 95, 97%. So basically, I would take these photographs and then reproduce them in a clearer vision so you could see really what they are. And I've sent some examples to you. That's the story of how, I sent those pictures plus Mr. Walson's video still frames. We could clear them up and really get an idea that, hey, this does look like a submarine, or this does look like a saucer, what have you, right? So I think it was about 2003 or 2004. I was on the internet and I saw my first version of John Leonard Walson's pictures. It's still, I immediately knew inside myself that this was legitimate. And it wasn't just a photograph. You could see little shuttles landing and flying off this thing. And I did not know John Leonard at all, John Leonard Walson at all. I just knew that this person out there, and after a while, he was just writing it up as fast. He didn't even put his name on it. So I kept the best of the best pictures in the UFO genre kept coming up as this fast guy. I don't care. I don't care if he's doing a VHS, if he's doing a telescope, if he's doing a regular camera. This guy, for some reason, comes up with the craziest, clearest images. So I thought, well, that's it. To me, that's proof. I'm not sure if I believe in public disclosure, what they keep waiting for, because it's still kind of a personalized, it's your interpretation of what constitutes public disclosure. What would be enough for the world to say, all right, we all have a consensus? I
well,
still think it's
I'm going to say we are running rapidly out of time, because the scale of real-time AI pictures, where they can stick anything in real time onto the public 12K display screens, you can't trust a damn thing what these people are going to send. So we have a very narrow opportunity to expose these pictures as what you're saying. And this is what you're saying is really important because of this use of AI.
And I don't mean to interrupt, Mr. Miles. I've also noticed that we're rather fixated on a fuzzy dot. These pictures are just still fuzzy. Mr. Louis Alzondo and the imminent release. He's been #1 on Amazon and UFO books for 5
Well,
months.
he's a very well-paid CIA asset, and the CIA is doing what it thinks it wants to do, and it's a very responsible and mature organization with its roots in Prussia. Sorry, did I say that? Prussia with a P, and so I don't want to just they've got their dog and pony show. I want to concentrate what you're talking about and what John is talking about.
Yes, sir. But I mean, I am tying these together to say that to me, I respect the man, but it does feel a little bit like we're controlling the narrative. We're still fascinated by little fuzzy dots because the man
you
on
might
TV
say
says
that,
so.
but as they say, you might say that, but I wouldn't want to possibly comment. So let's stick to your story. I'm being what we
Yes,
call
sir.
diplomatic here
Yes, well, I think
for
we're
a
on the,
family audience.
we're on the same page, sir. All right. So it is a controlled situation. So all of a sudden, Mr. Walson is coming out with, I think he is over 10,000 hours of his materials. And they're very clear. There's detail, and now we can start to see function. There's some very exotic looking craft up there that I believe 90% of it is human technology, because it looks, humans aren't going to reinvent the wheel when they go into space. They're going to take what they already have and retrofit and you know.
Well, on a side note, the astronomers are saying that there's a plasma ocean above our atmosphere. That's in astronomy magazines. So if you are traveling at speed through a plasma, whatever you're traveling with would need to be almost like something that's like a submarine going through water. So that's why
Well,
the shape works.
and another possibility is what we have, the MEV, the multiple environment vehicle. I believe that this submarine can go back and forth. You know what I mean? And while I'm looking at Mr. Walson's materials, we end up starting to be able to annotate, like, units, squadrons, class, function, almost like the Navy or the military has different roles.
Yeah.
You have your fighters, you have your bombers, you have your support and your tanks. So we're starting to see this, if not military, paramilitary chain of command and mission support. My point is, I'm seeing a lot of like a construction equipment up there. It's not all submarines. I mean, there's like so many variations, and then you need fuel, then you need water, and to me, it looks like they're building those things up there, Miles. A
Well,
lot of them.
you keep talking about it. I'll just keep trying to find something. I've got to
Yes.
do something here. Yeah, it's this is really important, and you're using some kind of polarizer or depolarizer to see things in plain sight. You can
Yes.
use that also for seeing
direct
the human
light
aura.
can direct light can certainly hide things. Now, I also wanted to interject that a few years back, while recording one of these objects, Mr. Walson also got in the same frame, uh, the International Space Station went through. So now he's got one of these objects, one of these fast objects, one of these submarine things, and the space station. So
Well, I'm
now,
going to
what a
put that
lucky
behind me. You're talking about something like this.
that that is a crane mechanism. Actually, it's smaller than people think.
You put this the
That
size
one
of an
probably,
A380.
yes, it's a little bit. Those other objects could be, a couple hundred yards. But I mean, they're all different sizes, all different functions, all different distances. So the point is, when we're studying these, besides pretty pictures, now we want to figure out its function, its distance, possibly from the Earth, its speed, and then come up with some, educated guesses on why and what it's doing. That object there underneath the plane, I can find an Earth version. It's simply a crane. That's all it's doing. They put cables down on this thing, and they obviously have to land on something to get leverage. It's probably running off of hydrazine fuel, kind of like the Mars lander. I
But I
highly
mean,
doubt they're
this must have some kind of positioning control system and all the rest of it on there.
yeah,
I
there's a
mean, this is
pilot in
floating
there
in
up on
space.
the left. Yes. And we've seen a lot of these. These are merely pieces of construction equipment. So I don't really think they're building all these ships on the planet and sending them up. I think a lot of it is literally built up there.
Well, a friend
When
of
you
mine
consider,
mentioned that they were using these hybrid type um, beings that they've made in the underground biological labs for use on the lunar base. Do you think they're
yeah,
doing this on the moon?
but my point was I believe human beings alone, sans the extraterrestrial factor, I'm completely convinced that we are hundreds of years ahead in technology on what they share with us. And a greater majority of what I'm seeing in the Walson films could be us.
Well,
But why
exactly.
would they need it? Why would they need it? When I'm ex-military, to like put an entire a cover, a what's the word I'm looking for? My mind went blank. To have that encircling the world, I highly doubt they would need to go through all that just to watch the little, players, the bad actors on the planet. That looks like a shield from the outside. That's just my opinion.
Well, maybe it's as simple as the crews need to go home to coming back. Maybe that no.
And well, I would hope they'd get to come home after a year or two, but I mean, I've also seen some things up there that looked like an aircraft carrier, but it was up in space, shaped as if it could come down and land on the water, go into port, and nobody would even think twice of it. And back in the 90s, when I wrote the first, because I was on all the shows in America in the late 90s, I was on Art Bell, and I did that circuit, but I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but I was watching technology coming out of Vandenberg. You know what I mean? And that's why I was looking. I was looking for exotic, technology. I wasn't looking for aliens when I started this. But they were doing over the San Fernando Valley. They would have a contrail with no plane. You couldn't see a plane. It had like donuts on it. And then it would stop and a little ball would just disconnect. And then all you'd see was a ribbon of fire from horizon to horizon instantly. And that was us. They have that hyper jump technology for decades. It's not someday, it's not going to happen. Also, I think on the other side, I'm sure you've heard the term the USO.
Yeah, underwater stuff.
Unidentified. So take one of those submarines, bring it down to Earth, and they have these really highly articulate tail sections. And when you look at the detail on these spacecraft, the only reason they will have the control surfaces and the technology they do is if they were going underwater. There's no other reason for what I've seen up there. So they're probably doing double duty. I believe some of these things go back and forth underwater, then go up into space. That's just my opinion, but I mean, from studying the materials yes. When you look down on the left side, you can see the stereotypical nose of a submarine with the conning tower on it. And we go about halfway down, and some of these, we've got better pictures, but it takes a little time to study and get to that point. In the center, like halfway down the body of the fuselage, I see a lot of cranes, or that could be points where they embark and disembark, where the port. What am I looking at? I'm looking for the term. Sorry.
Well, you got to put infrastructure and other stuff. Now, you've made those drawings on it based on the original image.
Absolutely. There's nothing there that's been made up, but trying to clarify it. I see these major winches. There's a lot of heavy cable and, heavy duty equipment on these things. And that's just the beginning. So this one here is a different size than that other one. This one here is roughly the size of a Ohio class nuclear submarine. I want to put it somewhere. You have to consider that this thing could be possibly 150, 160 yards long. Yards. And the reason why the different sizes, they're not all at one orbit altitude. They're coming and going. So you could see one at 50 miles. You could see another one at 400 miles.
So it looks as if this would have a space deck, space command deck, and a normal submarine deck. So that could come into the ocean and you wouldn't know that whatever's underneath it, behind it.
Well, when you think about our nuclear submarines, you never see them unless they're coming and going out of their port. So, I mean, nobody sees this thing, right? But if it's underwater,
but But
The
it
point
also means
is
it can
I'm,
get access to land bases.
yes. And my point is, if you look at to the right up at the tail
Yes,
section,
that's
that's
yeah.
totally, it's completely articulatable, like from the almost from the elbow to the wrist. All these things change and move and turn, and to have a contraption of that size with that kind of technology, you'd have to be going high speed. And there's absolutely no reason for an aerial on a controlled surface in outer space. So this is the logic we're using to come to the conclusions. I don't think it's 100%, but I think 90 to 95% accurate on our assessment of function. But that tail section is amazing, and you could probably go multiple times the speed of conventional craft. It's a big, it's a big ratcheted wheel with belts and cables that will make that back tail section fold up or down or straight. It can actually rotate on its axis. The head section with the wings on it or the ailerons, that can rotate about 90 degrees each direction. I mean, it's just a remarkable piece of technology, and trying to figure out why you would need all that. You know what I mean? That it's a multiple environment vehicle, in my opinion. Water, space, and well, and they're not using rockets. And the space shuttle is not going back and forth taking them parts. You know what I mean?
Well, whilst we're on this, there's another. You seem to have another picture of you not looking something that you'd like to meet on a Saturday night.
That's me without my makeup on. I got to spend probably 25 years of my life working in the film and television industry, and completely unrelated. I mean, you know,
How
truth is,
unrelated is that image of that alien?
well, I'm just saying, I was literally a known UFO researcher on the shows simultaneously. I was on a couple different TV shows, a regular doing different space aliens, and it's completely, Mr. Miles, unrelated. I also have music on the radio, and I've written multiple books, but I'm 6'5". Back then I was about 240 pounds. I was a stunt man. And I just got a phone call out of nowhere. Hey, come on down. At the same time, I was on the Art Bell show and stuff. I just got a random call from a agent saying, we want you to come try out for this part, right? I didn't know what it was. And I went down there, and they wanted me to be on Star Trek.
I think Star Trek
I'm,
Voyager was a great show.
I actually got to do about a season on there, but, you know, stuntman, stand in, you name it, everything. But, you know, I actually, yeah, it was amazing experience for me. But a lot of
Well,
people, as soon as they hear
let's
that
keep
you're an
talking
actor
about
on
that.
TV,
I mean, the Star Trek. There's talk that there were a lot of advisories in Star Trek to sort of break the concepts of certain scenarios. But I mean, you weren't in scripting or anything like that, so you just turned up and did your job and whatever.
yeah, that was totally separate. I'm not even sure why they contacted me. It seemed a little bit of a setup.
Now, why did
You know
it
what I
feel
mean?
like a setup?
Well, I had just done the Art Bell radio show and talked to like a lot of people. He finally, after I beat on him for a year, he finally brought me in and said, okay, because I don't know if you're familiar with Britt and Lee Elders.
Ooh, vaguely, there's a lot of stuff at the UFO Congress with Bob Brown over
Is
years. Yeah, explain.
they were filming UFOs coming in and out of looked like volcanic vents or on volcanoes in Mexico.
Okay.
And Art Bell apparently needed somebody that he trusted to vet me until he accepted me. Does that make sense? That happens a lot in this business.
Yeah.
Like, I'm kind of going off into the weeds, but I want to cover this point. John Walson can have a clear picture of a space tanker, and I don't get a response or very rarely. But if you had a little fuzzy ball, that's on all the TV shows, right? I had taken this information that we're talking about, Mr. Miles, to some of the most famous, highest people in media and the UFO genre. I guess I'm very respectful, and I like Mr. Nick Pope. Okay, and
Nick
I've
Pope
been
has
in.
his job and he does it. And
Yes,
I interviewed Nick Pope and he was in a rush and he never says anything without counteracting it. And I got him to say something which he didn't counteract. And he said, well, we've certainly been shooting at them with our gun cameras. Oops.
yes.
So they're
But
they're on radar, they're real, they're up there, they've got physical photographic evidence of it. And then he just compounded that error by stopping and then saying, "Oh, I don't think I should have said that." That's a little clip, but that's from about 12 years ago. Anyway,
I,
the key decision that I found was he wrote to me saying for Sky Television, UFOs are of no defense significance. So on one hand, oh, it's irrelevant. But if they're involved with the ETs and they've been up to their necks with the ETs, they would also be of no defense significance because they're totally involved with them. And that's my stand on that.
well, I had asked him, um, why does somebody like John Walson have this amazing detail in this repetitive experiment? It's not a one and done. This guy has been doing this for decades. Why is he not one of the most famous people on this planet? Because, in my opinion, he's proven that stuff is there. And Mr.
I
Pope
think you've
said,
just said it.
he said, well, I have no idea why some things catch on and other things don't. And I then said to him, this is the most prolific, repetitive, astrophotographer that's ever been. He should be one of the most famous people, at least in this genre. And he said, oh, I don't know. Just next. And I said, but he says, I know, right? Okay. And then there's a fella in America that very recognizable faces doing all these shows. Anyway, it's going to hit me in a minute after we hang up. And I asked him the same thing, and they always skirt the question. They do not
Which
answer it.
era are you talking about?
Well,
This guy.
now, okay.
No, with the other guy in the States. It's not John Napper or anything.
Ben Hansen. You know who he is? Factor faked and all that. Ex FBI, and he goes out and he does all these, all these investigations on it. He said he knew very well of John. He even wanted him to build one of his telescopes for him. But I said, well, why then? Why do you guys not feature that? Like, well, budgets and all this. But my point is, now you have a repeated experiment. I'm repeating myself by saying this, that we can actually study, details and function. We know approximately that, these things are up about 100, 150 miles higher than the International Space Station for they don't collide, right? We know that repeatedly we're seeing construction equipment. We're seeing, I've even seen fueling towers and, so this is a very exotic equipment doing mundane things. And they just would not answer the question, why do you not put him on there? But
I'll say again, because they are of no defense significance, because they're up to their necks with the ETs, and they're up to the necks with the very bad ETs. And they've screwed up big time. That's me saying that. In answer to what you've just said.
Yes. But I mean, repeatedly, time and time again, the people that are quote unquote purveyors of information, and when we find out, we're certainly going to let you know. And I'm saying, bull.
Now, really,
Even the guys that are on our side, they go to a certain point and they're shut down, in my opinion. They
I've
won't
seen that.
allow Walson.
I've seen that on many occasions.
It's like they will not listen, or they will not, focus on the Walson material. And I think that's really a bad idea, to ignore what this man has shared with people. You know what I mean?
Well, there's a guy here called Bob Osborne. He's been doing a heck of a lot of research on the Fabian agenda, and the Fabian agenda, which encompasses a large number of MPs, British prime ministers, the Fabian Society, Aldous Huxley, Brave New World, all that stuff is identical to the alien agenda to wipe us all out, which is in progress right now.
And they want what?
They want rid of us, or they want to farm us.
And if you are dealing with a species or a technology that can go in between time and space.
Now, that's a good thing. Explain the title.
Well, I think that is a brand. Far Above Space and Time was a brand that Mr. Walson has been using for years. Okay. And so let me interject here. I think it was in April of this year. I
That's
was on
2024.
Facebook.
We're near the end of 2024.
I was on Facebook and I got a friend request from John L. Walson. And at first I thought it was a joke, because I certainly know this guy of his work. But I mean, why would he be contacting me? I mean, this guy is like, to me, he might as well have, invented fire or something. The information that, my point being is, what I thought I was a grizzled old veteran, that I really knew everything about this genre, and he stripped it down. The stuff that he has shared with me, stripped it down to the bones. And I'm like, man, was I naive, right? But there's some videos out there, Mr. Miles, that the world doesn't get to see for some reason, all right? Some of the craziest stuff out there, even put out on the internet, we do not find. I don't know how it's blocked or delayed or whatever. There's a fellow, I'll give you why I'm saying this. There's a fellow recently who was driving back from a conference. I think maybe you were even at that conference, had his camera running, and saw a UFO come over his car. Now, by the end of this little sequence, whatever was there came into the car. And it was on the camera. And he's got some sequences that would just scare the hell out of even grizzled people. And they're so afraid of what they have, they're not putting it out there.
That would be a very unique situation which has been allowed to happen. That's a deliberate thing.
It would be allowed, but I know of stills. I could actually send you some of it. But anyways, they captured it on the infrared tape. It would just make you choke. All right. But so one of the people were talking to me, one of the passengers said they noticed they had an hour missing on their watch when they came back. And the guy says to me, so, wow, was that car driving down the road for an hour by itself with no driver? And I was trying to explain to him that they can remove you, take you away for an hour, and put you back at the exact millisecond you were removed. And a lot of folks have a hard time understanding what I just said. But if you are up against an adversary that could do something like that, there's absolutely no chance. It's a checkmate.
I interrupt because there's a brilliant man, the late Colonel Tom Bearden, has published many books on scalar energetics, space-time manipulation, and how it's possible within the physics. The physics we are being taught is a lie. Einstein and all that is junk. And that's how a lot of this stuff can happen. It's scalar energetics, and some people call it crudely the electric universe principle, because the structure of the atom is different to what we're told, and a whole pile of other things subtly work if you use that kind of, as I'm saying in a very general term, electric universe principle, you can shrink space and time. You can dump energy into it and make it bigger or whatever. But that is within our science. It's not suppressed. That's my
Yeah,
point.
it's within human science.
Yeah, it's within human science.
And some of these things, even like with the Einsteinian, the limits, that there's supposed to be a speed limit to light, or
That's all
I'm
to
not sure if I
completely
believe in
to
that.
fool us. That's all to completely fool us. It's junk.
And I'm
In fact,
so I had my theories.
if a program on TV has a scientist or some front man quoting Einstein, the whole thing is junk. Just throw it out.
Absolutely, and I had a lot of things within myself that I I believe probably a theory, a philosophy, but studying Mr. Walson's, materials basically was reinforced. It really proved it to me, and I've lived in a reality for 30 or 40 years that I know that the UAP phenomenon, the UFO phenomenon is real. I don't have to have it proven to me anymore. So I'm not waiting for full disclosure. That's, to me, that's just selling a product to people.
It's selling a, keeping us waiting. Oh please, oh please, oh do tell us, please. Oh, you're not going to tell us. Could you please tell us next week? So they're not looking elsewhere.
And they control the narrative. It's like the guy on TV said, so now it's true. And in America, and I'm not insulting anyone, the majority of the media for UAP or other paranormal, they really seem to me to be celebrity chasers. You know what I mean? If they get somebody that's name is known a little better, you're put on the back rack, and it doesn't even, the material, the information did not seem as significant as the personality or the facial, the name recognition. And I've been very frustrated over the years. I told you back in the 90s, I was a known UFO researcher in America. It was not the government. I've literally seen the men in black. They are a real thing. Now, the first book that you have, and thank you so much for the video where you were doing the review of the book.
Great.
That was a very limited edition of the first. It was basically a test because if you publish yourself independently through Amazon or what have you, if you go in there and you find out, by the time you submit your computer file, Amazon's computers have a tendency to compress it. And it can your work does not come out perfectly, and you can go back and you can fix things. That was the first run. And
well, this is a large format book,
Yes. And I have the same one here. It's also black and white of the same book, but only about 30, 35 edition or printings of the book you have exist. So if that ever blows up, you have a very rare.
Oh my God. By the way,
not only that,
I bought this from a bookshop. I'm going to give a bookshop in Devizes. The
really?
Devizes bookshop is run by a fantastic lady called Jo, and she can get you any book, even a $200 book, which I got from the States, which is a German translation that Werner von Braun read. It was the second last one in America, and I got it, and she got it for me. And just as a bit of fun, even though this is published by Amazon, and even though it is an Amazon book, and you put it on that, she has a little sticker, and I just want to promote, I didn't buy this on Amazon.
All right.
So that's from the Devizes bookshop in Devizes in Wiltshire, and she's bloody fantastic and wonderful. She can get things in a morning sometimes. Anyway, that's a shout out for Devizes books. So
when I'm talking to Mr. Walson, when I first met him, I'm kind of going into the weeds, but I'm trying to pull it back here. Okay.
Yeah, let's do this.
And I finally got some time with him. I must have spent 1,000 hours interviewing him for the book. I talked him into letting me do this for him because, you know, the story of somebody that can reliably show you how to photograph and see real detail in a subject like this, I think should be like historical stuff.
Yes, and
But
this is what this
that is
book is
not,
about: how to do this.
and well, the diagrams, the photographs, the breakdowns are repeated over and over by the time you read that book. But a lot of people don't read these days, Mr. Miles. So first and foremost, it's a picture book, right?
Yeah.
The majority of it, you could read this book without reading a single word and get a lot of the story, all right? But separate from that, the true story of John Walson is, even to me, more interesting than what he does. I don't know how well you know that guy, but I mean,
Well,
he's not just some
that's an
farmer.
example of what he's doing with the telescope.
Yes.
There are other examples here where he has been harassed by army helicopters, an awful lot of this kind of thing. He's been through hell.
He's being harassed right now, Miles, Mr.
Yeah.
Miles. I'm sorry.
And his colleague,
Yes, he's really going through hell.
his colleague Duncan Davis has taken a few hits.
But Mr. Walson's service to Her Majesty, officially and unofficially, you know what I'm talking about?
Yes,
This is not
we
just some mild...
we need to show that off and blow
yes,
a few trumpets on that.
Yes. He's not just some farmer, though. He's a very trained, very vetted investigator. And he's been through so much that the PTSD causes him a little issue with writing. And sometimes, you know, so that's why I said, why don't you let me write your story out with pictures? But, you know, as you just said, there's a lot of things we probably shouldn't talk about, especially in his first book, that basically let's make it family friendly. And, you know, there's information in there that I imagine somebody probably wouldn't be happy about, but it's still conjecture. You know what I mean? Somebody probably isn't pleased those have been published, but they're all done legally and right out in the open, you know. There's nothing subversive about any of the collection of that information, so I'm not worried about it. But
well, we're not going to worry about it. We're not going to be put off by these things or people or whatever they are. We're going to chase their asses and make sure this stuff sticks. Okay.
I'm really dumbfounded as why Mr. Walson isn't a household name. When you've been doing it for 20 or 30 years and we can get real information and shows you how to do it, there's nothing magical about it. It's just,
well,
he
this
figured
is the point.
out,
So how did he make the telescope? Let's focus on the mechanics of what's involved here.
The knowledge of, you know, what he has shared with me in the early 2000s, 2003, 2004, he had a common Sony video camera, right? But he has a lot of knowledge. He's built his own telescopes and he pulled the lens off the video camera, went inside the video camera, and he did some manipulations to the barrel that have to do with focusing and CCD, controlled coupling devices, right?
Yeah.
And he keeps sending out the same information to people. That's why we did the book. Just tell them to read the book, right? But
so that's the whole point. Because it didn't have the lens of the video camera to get in the way, you're directly focusing onto the sensor of the camera.
And then you're focusing that sensor onto the mirror of the telescope. So you have the combined power of the telescope magnification and then the zoom. And he manipulated the barrel of the lens in there in a way that I believe is proprietary. You know, it's like his little secret. He doesn't share all of that.
Okay, well, let's keep it proprietary. Let's keep his details within the right side.
So So we're getting the moral equivalent of, thousands of X's instead of hundreds. Now, you probably know, like the original microscope, for hundreds of years, it had a limit of several hundred magnification. But then when the digital age came along, they came up with our electron microscopes, right? So it tenfolded, yes. So basically, he takes a really powerful telescope, and then he puts the camera in a special combination at the end of the lens or the eyepiece, and he extends the barrel on that. He's got a formula, it's not something that is easily done without a little bit of work and, evolution. But so all of a sudden you've got a telescope land-based that can peel 4 or 5 plus thousand magnification. That's how he's been able to do that. It wasn't a prayer or some special power he has. He figured out the technology and had the emotion, the passion to follow this through, because to me, that broke the bank. That's just one way. And I find out there's a lot of different ways that people can prove it to themselves, for themselves, much more powerful to me personally than seeing some man on TV saying, hey, it's okay now to believe. And you have to believe that somebody has or is. I know they've seen it. They haven't protracted this mechanism to the point, Mr. Walson has his lens pushed to the limits of refraction, I think they call it.
Yeah.
To the dirty,
there are limitations
hairy end. Yes.
within the crystal structure of glass, and how light goes through that and how you can deal with that. And then that's when your dollars start going up in the quality of glass and stuff like that.
Yes. But now we don't just have pretty pictures. We have something that we can study. Repeatable experiment. This guy, I've never heard of him going out and getting skunked, as the Yanks say. I've never heard him go out and not get some amazing evidence. And I got one review on the book that's saying, oh, he doesn't tell you anything, and there's no this and there's no that. This book is nothing but repeating how he did it, how you can do it, what kind of equipment, over and over to ad nauseum. There's a lot of gamesmanship, in this, when you're publishing and trying to show the world a new paradigm. It beat me up so bad, Mr. Miles, that I walked away from it. I figure I did my duty. So what happens 20 years later is people discover this new thing that was on TV 20 years ago, thousands of times repeated. And then there's a new book. So I've been doing some version of this my whole life, pursuing this subject. And then I had my 15 minutes of fame in Los Angeles. And then right around the same period of time, I get this mysterious phone call saying, come on down and be a space alien on a TV show. So when I would do a convention, a UFO convention or something, and somewhere along the line, somebody would ask, or it came up, what do you do for a day job? And I tell them that, then they just think, oh, this is all a PR stunt, right? Well, and it was that thing you could turn on in the middle of the night when everything else was off. And I remember driving, on vacations or whatever, and having listened to Art Bell for years. And I finally got to talk to him. And through him, I met Whitley Strieber, who was an old friend of mine. I've been on his show multiple times.
I better be careful handling this extremely rare copy, because it's so rare I don't want to crease it. So I'm going to put this down gently and hold this one up.
That's the one. If people look on Amazon, that's the cover. But I mean, so after we saw the submarines, after we saw the tankers, and I'm thinking somewhere up there, we're going to see the defensive escort part of it. And we found them. There are gunships up there. Absolutely. I've never had any visits. I've never had anybody talk to me, and I live right down the road from Fort Hood. Mr. Walson has had a lot of harassment recently in his life. Another reason why I'd like more people to kind of gather around him or help him a little more or know of him.
In many respects, that's why what we're doing now is so important. If you hide and sort of just go away, then they can make you disappear easily. But if you're talking about it and it's out there, publish and be damned. This is what you do. Get the books out there. Another person in this country called Peter Paget, he published a book called The Welsh Triangle. And after it was published, he had a lot of volume sales. In other words, the Ministry of Defence bought up the remaining copies that hadn't been bought up by the public, and it was silenced for about 25 years.
There's been a minimal response. It's that book. We don't really have. Let me say this right. Like with the imminent. There's so many TV shows, and I wouldn't be surprised at all if there's more than £1 million invested through time just in the radio and the TV spots and stuff. I mean, at least the moral equivalent.
This book is what people need to buy.
There's also some information in there that goes to the next level, because as we're talking about military and all this technology, this fella also is taking pictures of things that are not military or human technology. I've seen a couple pictures, videos that, they were almost across the room in distance 3 or 4 times. It was not a piece of hardware. Through the course of Mr. Walson's, his adventures, he has gotten pictures of EBEs. I could send them to you. I mean, and they're in that book too. The color version shows it to you. Some of them were close enough that he could have touched them with his arm. He didn't see it. I had to point out some of this stuff to him. And he wasn't out there looking for, Zeti, or there are species on his videos that I've never even heard of before. Some of them up close.
Are we talking some kind of plasma life form?
I wouldn't say they were all plasma.
No, but some of them.
I mean, there was one in that book where he has a closed circuit security system on his house, right? And one day something tripped. When something moves, it'll tell you, it'll give you an alert, right?
Yeah.
And I saw the video, it was early morning, and you just saw like some steam or something kind of quickly pass by. That's all you saw.
I think they're called smokies.
But Mr. Walson went back and looked at it frame by frame, and there's details and information in those frames that'll just choke you. Because they're like in another time continuum. You can see them and they're here, but we're not at the same speed. You know what I mean? I also have a tendency to vet people by, the companies that they keep. So I'm kind of guilty of it too. But the people that are aware of John Walson's work, I thought he was exaggerating. And everything he's told me, he's been able to back up in time, at least with facts and, evidence. John Lear invites him to come out to his house. I mean, John Lear to me is like a hero. He's a folk hero in America.
Are you talking about the original? Well, that's there somewhere, right? Okay.
That's just one example. Yeah. If somebody goes through this book and really reads it 4 or 5 times in there, you'll get a picture of something that's not a human being, and it's not in the sky. It's in his backyard. Really shocking, though, how much information can be inside one of those photographs.
Yes.
And I mean, especially before the JPG compression. And the reason I had brought up Jose
That's a
is
great
because that
picture
was,
of John with John.
yes, I love it.
That's a great picture. And that's what
I
they were
love it,
looking
man.
at. And I think on that video clip, he's talking about how it was used to take out 9/11, the buildings. Guys, you've got to get this book. This is a fantastic book. Really great.
I really think it's just a matter of the world needs to know about this guy's his research, or at least his premise. If
Yeah.
he needs the idea of what he's doing. If I think the information, the material will stand for itself and on its own, but you got to make people aware of not only of this person, but the concept of a repeatable, verifiable experiment. It's not just a one and done. I really believe if he took one fantastic picture, he'd probably be known around the world. But when he claims that he can do this, you know, if you say it's a fantasy, it's a fiction, people, oh, they love it. Now watch it. They say it's based on a true story. All of a sudden they get defensive, and that, you
Well,
know, we have to adjust ourselves.
let's round this up in a few minutes. The key to these books is for you out there with your telescopes to get better pictures than what John L. Walson's got.
Absolutely.
Let's make that a competition and let's get people to do that.
That was always my intention on solar obliteration, that I wanted to put the information out there and have the next generation teach me. And like that fellow in England I was telling you, he's doing the HD versions. Now I can finally see clear pictures of what I was taking 30 years ago.
Well, there
And
are
I'm
now
very
Sony
thankful.
cameras. There's various cameras which can shoot color in darkness. There is the technology there. We can do it.
Well, I've also found that, well, okay. I've seen a couple myself up close, but that's another show, okay? But with the advent of commercially available infrared, UV, what they call full spectrum cameras, that's the end of that game. Any person that have that equipment can point it up at the sky and find UFOs. I'm telling you. I think they would like figure out a way to use the night vision during sunlight.
Yeah.
This book here, anyway, that's one of my books. It's called Solar Obliteration.
Hold it up. Let's get a good shot of it.
It's on Amazon too, in the same section where we have Fast, Far Above Space and Time. But the reason I brought this up is through radio and TV and magazines. Last count around the year 2000, we had got that book out, that information out to over 500 million people. It's a true story. Now, you said 25 years later, people don't remember my name, but they remember the experiment.
And getting
And
it in a book is so important.
Yes, and it outlives you. But people are rediscovering this on their own all the time. I believe in the 100 monkeys theory, that if it's obvious to me, somebody else. But I want to put John Walson's book on the same level that solar obliteration got. I want hundreds of millions of people to have access to it. That's kind of like my intent, and it's not even trying to sell a book. I think the world, the change that would in society and medicine and education, transportation. Can you imagine the universities and the new departments of government and oversight to have access to a portal where we could go to the other side of the world within seconds or something? There's so many advantages.
As I say, I think they've already got access to that. They're just not letting us, and they do speak. Well,
and
we don't want to venture onto that at the moment.
I think you've hit the gist. Again, I started out our conversation, Mr. Miles, by saying that I believe that we are hundreds, if not more, years ahead in our technology as human beings. than we are allowed to know, and that's probably why they don't want to unravel the UFO question. I'm so glad to meet you, sir.
Well, it's
And you know,
great to
I've
see you,
watched you,
sir.
and
But
you were a
the main thing is it's coming up to Christmas, people. At the time of recording, this is the 6th of December. You can't buy this book. This is mine. Now I know it's so rare. Get this book in your local bookstore now. Go to Amazon, buy it now, and buy one for every member of your family. And if you know somebody scientific who knows what the telescope is, buy them a copy as well.
the explanations and the diagrams on how to do what this man is doing is all in there repeatedly. So if anybody says, "Oh, what's the point?" He doesn't tell how he does it. He certainly does ad nauseum. So I would like a whole bunch of John Walsons coming back with this kind of material, and we could really change something. And this is one of many I found ways and techniques to find things that are out there. But boy, it's a slam dunk, as we Yanks say. You know, to me, it is one more version of proof. John Walson is a wizard in my mind, and I think the world needs to know about him, and more people need to know about Mr. Johnston too.
Well, thank you very much on that. I think we couldn't possibly end on anything better than that. So we'll call it a day, and I'll put this together.
Anytime I can be of service to you, sir, I'm honored and flattered to be on your presentation.
Well,
Thank you.
it's been hell, I have to say. Been doing this now for 30 years. 1994 I started doing this.